session. Now we have Adrian, also from Zurich, also liking coffee, joining us also from Zurich. Yeah. So good to have you here, Adrian.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
So Adrian, you're an independent UI designer, developer. Well, UI developer, designer, I don't know what's better to say these days.
A bit of both.
A bit of both. Working on this wonderful intersection of how to make our interfaces a bit more conversational, I would say. Right. So you've been playing a bit with chatbots and kind of creating those conversational interfaces. Now, would you say that a conversational interface is always better than a good old boring interface? And specifically, when I ask this question, I think about things like checkouts or bookings, where with the checkout you have, I don't know, 10, 15 input fields that you have to go through. With chatbots, it's going to be an interesting kind of conversation between the two. But it might feel, at least in my experience, it might feel a bit slower than just pushing buttons or filling in a form. Yeah. Now, what's your experience been like?
Well, to your first question about whether conversational interfaces are always better, imagine you would use Photoshop as a conversational interface. It would probably not be very delightful, especially so if it's a tool that is meant to be used by professionals that really need that sophisticated control, then you already have a use case where chatbots will probably not do very well. As for forms, I think forms are an interesting case because forms are really that very, very boring and very tedious thing that haunted us for a long time on the web. And actually, during my experiment on my website, I had this interesting experience where I created this chatbot on my website, right? And I basically embedded the contact form within the conversation. And it was really interesting because I lost my wallet last year, and then someone found it on the lake. And then when he apparently found my website, and then he got in touch with me. I got an email, hey, I found my wallet, and I was really happy about that, right? And then when we met up, I asked him, by the way, how did you get in touch with me? And then he said, wait, what do you know? We had a chat, no? And that was a really crazy experience because the guy was having a conversation with my website, but he thought that he was actually having a real conversation with me, right? And I thought that was a really interesting thing because that changes the experience, the subjective experience completely from what we were used to on the web. And I think in terms of efficiency, it kind of depends on where the industry will, on how it will evolve. If you take WeChat or just those more centralized approaches to design, I mean, right now the web is a mess, right? If you want to buy something online, you have to create an account on every single platform, right? Which is ridiculous. And passwords, and you need to remember passwords and everything. You have password managers, which really shouldn't be necessary. And I think that's where chatbots can really evolve. So let's imagine if you think about Facebook, right? If you want to order coffee online, or just if you want to book a ticket, why should you have to create an account on every single airline if you can just reuse your payment data that is already on Facebook or on the platform that you would use and re-enter it every time?
But but this is also what's coming up now with Google Pay, Apple Pay, things like that, where you can actually just save your data once and then it can be reused everywhere. Yeah. As long as those interfaces actually stick to norms and respect that.
So I think in this case it's fair to say that that pain point is probably gone. But I think in terms of how the experiences will feel, that's still a very different thing. Another thing that's nice about from the conversational point of view, I think, is that you always see your transactions history in one place. So whereas the web has all these fragments in different places, you get an email, you get maybe an SMS, or you have your content all in all kinds of different places. Whereas if you interact with a bot on Facebook and you're just used to using that bot on Facebook, you can see all your history in one single place. It's just like it's just a bit of a different model to think about. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's cases where one thing will always better. It always comes down to the use case. But like for repetitive tasks and simple tasks, especially like an airline, like a boarding pass or something, I'm so tired of downloading an app that I just use once and then it's just lingers on my home screen, but I'll never use it again, right? So these are really the cases where I think bots can excel.
Right, and it's also interesting to see all those companies kind of creating those wonderful, shiny demos of how, well, a customer is actually interacting with the chatbot, and then everything is flawless, and you have all these wonderful menus kind of popping in. You just press a button, and then it's clear the dates and you know, the timing, and everything is kind of so smooth. But it's not the reality, right? Because when the user responds, well, we have to make a decision as designers, right? So do we allow users to just type in whatever they want as plain text and, you know, make sure that the chatbot understands what the user wants? Or should we actually just say, okay, if it's a decision, let's just present buttons instead?
Yeah.
So at some point, we will allow for just typing in text, and at some point, we will allow only buttons, right? So is it more like a fallback for a chatbot? Because, I mean, where do we stand? My question is, I guess, where do we stand in terms of machine learning? Are chatbots, are there any frameworks that we can use for chatbots so they can really understand what customers are doing? Or is it still an unexplored territory?
Yeah, I think like the topic of artificial intelligence is huge, right? It's probably the #1 trending topic of last year, next to like with the whole chatbot thing. And I think it's fair to say that APIs, or like in general, the artificial intelligence did make a huge step forward, right? But I still think that that conversational interfaces don't necessarily have to be fully. They don't need to have a perfect natural language understanding. So to your point, when you mentioned that sometimes you can use buttons, I think that there's a reason why suggestions has kind of become a pattern, because people just notice that the technology is not there yet. I mean, like there's very smart people working on it all around the world, but I think it will take some time until we can actually clearly understand what the user's intent is in any given situation. There's just so much things. I created a pizza bot, for instance, right, for myself, just to play around. Pizza. Yeah, exactly, just because I love pizza. And so when I tested it with a few people, the flow goes like this: hey, I'd like a pizza. Cool, let's get you a pizza. What do you want? And then the user can say, well, I'd like pizza prosciutto and a pizza margherita. And then the bot asks anything else. And then my expectation, so my mental model was that the user would probably say something like, well, maybe a Coke, right? Or maybe another pizza, or maybe lasagna, I don't know. But then this user said, yeah, olives, you know, olives on the pizza. So, and that was just completely, it was completely unexpected, right? And for us, it's the most natural thing to do. We say, okay, sure, I can put some olives on your pizza, but for a bot, it's very hard to understand, because those edge cases, which are maybe not even edge cases, are very hard to identify. So like chatbots, I think the #1 thing that I find so fascinating about chatbots is that it changes the way we feel and think about the conversations we have with our clients. Because if you think about it, interaction design has always been, there's a reason we call it human-computer interaction, right? It's kind of a conversation. It's just the first time in history that we really have this conversational model where you actually do have a conversation. And this just brings many new challenges with us. But it means that we need a lot of empathy, trying to understand. It's kind of a trend word by now, empathy, right?
Yes,
we need a lot of empathy.
Right.
So you need to understand what is the thing that the user might want to do next at any point of interaction. I think that's very important, and that's where suggestions really excel, because they set clear expectations what the bot can do and what it cannot.
Right. So for you, because you've built one, or a couple, is it tough to build a chatbot? What does it take? And also from a design perspective, is it a big effort or a big undertaking, or are there actually any frameworks that you can use right away? I think that Facebook was working on, or maybe it was Google actually, on something that would enable you to read out what user is typing and then try to generate intent, rather than actually trying to understand the entire phrase, generate intent, so you as designer can respond to intent.
Yeah.
An intent could be, I want to book something like a flight from from Cologne to Mallorca or so, right? And it doesn't matter what the user is typing, the framework is going to try to understand it and produce, the user wants to go from A to B, right? What was your experience? Are there any frameworks or tools that kind of make it easier for us to do something with chatbots today?
So, so there's a couple of questions.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So the first thing is, are there tools, and what is my experience in how to build bots, right? I think like the most important thing is writing. I think it's really interesting also to see how much similarity conversational design has to traditional information architecture, where you kind of have to try to understand, okay, what does the user want to do? It's like meeting a stranger at a bar, and you want to explain this person what your business model is. What can you do, right? So you have to explain that in a very easy way. What are the tools that you can use? Well, personally, for my experiment that I run on my website and as well as the UX Sphere, I created my own platform based on WordPress. I created a plugin that allows you to create conversations with WordPress, basically. If you need the natural language understanding part, I know there's a lot of platforms available. There's Chatfuel. I personally use the API AI. And I think it's interesting to see how these tools get more and more sophisticated, because I always thought that you need some programming, like development knowledge in order to get started. But actually, these the graphical user interfaces, those chatbot builders, they've come a long way. So I'd suggest that the best way to get started is just dive into those platforms and try to get familiar with the user interface.
Right. Now, one thing is chatbots, right? So which are on conversation interfaces, which are living on the one side of the interfaces we're creating.
Yeah.
On the other side, we have this kind of emergence of transitions and animations. It's probably very hard to find any application or any interface these days that wants to be smooth and kind of silky in a way, and nice and beautiful, and would get away without animations or transitions altogether.
Yeah.
So, however, when it comes to animations and transitions, it's always a bit difficult, I think, to find that really right animation or that right transition, so it all feels consistent and coherent.
Yeah.
So, how do you figure out what the right animation transition is, or what is your design process behind selecting them? I'm asking this because you've written an article about animations, transitions, been talking about it as well quite a lot.
Yeah, so like I think the number one thing, I think there's one component that is extremely underappreciated when it comes to design, and that's time. Right? When we think about time, we mostly think of it as good design saves time. Right, but I think that time can also be used to make an experience more delightful. And the way we represent time in interaction design is with motion. Motion helps us to basically build these mental models. What I find so fascinating about animation is that it allows you to create a spatial relationship between items on the screen. So if you go from one state to the next, you can clearly observe what happened on the screen, and it explains the interaction. So one of the things that I see a lot of designers, I think, struggle with this is that they think of screens as individual things. So when you look at a screen, at one individual screen, you might say, actually, I don't understand what's happening here, right? But then if you consider the full journey of how the user got to this screen, including the animation, then it actually makes sense. Because sometimes you want to over-navigate everything. You want to add a back button for everything. You want to add a home button for everything, or an undo action for everything. But if you consider the user journey, including the motion that has been applied, some of the screens can be made much more easier. Actually, they just look much easier. Because
it's kind of like a visual feedback that you get right away as you navigate from one place to another.
Exactly.
Right?
It's kind of walking. If you leave your apartment in the morning and you walk around during your walk, during the time when you leave your house to the bus stop, you build orientation, what's going on around you.
Right. And you don't have it if you see just a screen.
Exactly.
One screen alone.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what most designers do, right? We design in those static screens, and then we just try to figure out what something is probably happening in between, but we don't really spend time consciously thinking about how we can transition from one screen to the next. Because if you cannot figure it out, then there's probably a reason for that. There's probably an information architectural flaw in your design, because usually if you're doing a good job, or at least in my experience, most of the time, when you can animate from one screen to the next, it's a very good sign.
Right.
But maybe
So,
it's just
so we basically need a magic move, keynotes, magic
exactly.
move for everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So
It's
it
a really
will
good
animate
example.
automatically
Exactly.
from one place to another.
It's a good example.
Right? Okay, so I don't see any questions coming in. If you have any, please feel free to drop them in. We have a couple of minutes left. But I have one. So you seem to be like doing lots of different things. So at some point you've been doing front end, at some point you've been doing transitions, animations, at some point now you're doing conversational interfaces. Now for this year, as of today, what are you excited about most? What really drives you? What is the thing that you want to master this year?
What I want to master.
I know it's already February, so time is running
photography
out.
actually.
Photography.
Right now I'm really into photography. I have to be careful.
Not in
though.
coffee anymore.
Coffee is last year. Actually, early last year.
No, this is done. No more coffee for you.
Still coffee, but I feel now I reached a level where I'm pretty happy with the coffee. I can still learn more, but I'm actually very happy with it.
Okay.
And now I just want to learn some new things. I've always been fascinated with photography, but I just never took the time to actually
I see.
learn the basics of it.
Just one more thing I want to mention, and that really confused me a little bit when I saw it, and I'm sure you remember that as well. Just a couple of weeks, I think, ago, there was a big TV show when two Google Home bots were talking to each other for a while.
Yeah.
I was really surprised by how massive the attention for it was. I mean, there were like dozens of thousands of people watching. Do you think that we are entering a new era of TV shows?
Yeah, actually, it's an interesting thought. Why not? Why not? I mean, I think what's interesting as well is that we talked about suggestions before, right? And I mentioned it in one of my in a talk of mine. I talk about messaging apps, and Arlo has this concept of smart replies, similar to suggestions, but when you talk to someone. And I think it's interesting how these built-in intelligence in products will affect the social aspect of our lives, right? Because like if you send me a picture of your food and then I just say yummy, will I really mean it? Is it still the same? How will it affect the way we communicate with each other? And I think when machines, because then I said, well, at some point your chatbot can just talk to my chatbot, right? So we can get rid of it.
So we can get rid of the small talk.
Exactly. We could just move on, cut to the chase. Yeah, but it's definitely going to be very interesting. I think we could be very well on the verge of something new. I think right now it's very experimental, where the technology is still so young that we're just fascinated and captivated by the idea of it. But I think we definitely still have a long way to go until we have those real natural conversations.
Maybe at some point we're going to have something like Facebook for chatbots.
Exactly.
Where they will befriend each other instead of us.
Friends.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Adrian.
Thank you.
Really great having you. Looking forward to a talk later.
Cool. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Excellent.